Hi, I'm Katherine with Free Tours by Foot. Free Tours by Foot is a walking tour company. We offer walking tours in cities all over the world, as well as self-guided tours, audio tours, private tours, and now virtual tours. So today we're going to be going through Midtown Manhattan.
We begin our tour at the intersection of 42nd Street and 6th Avenue, just to the east of Times Square, with a view of the New Year's Eve ball. From here, we'll take a walk through Bryant Park and make a stop at the main branch of the New York Public Library. We will then take a stroll down 42nd Street, where we will see the iconic Art Deco masterpiece, the Chrysler Building, before taking a walk through Grand Central Terminal, arguably New York City's grandest interior space with its wonderful astrological ceiling. Then it's a short walk along Park Avenue, where we will find the headquarters of several multinationals, as well as the ritzy Waldorf Astoria Hotel. We will next head west towards the beautiful Gothic St. Patrick's Cathedral, seat of the Catholic Archdiocese of the city. And for the finale, we will take a stroll through Rockefeller Center to admire the art and architecture of this grand complex. This tour is an abridged version of our live guided Midtown Manhattan tour. We'll leave a link to this tour in the description. And that tour, like all of our tours, is free to take and operates on a pay-what-you-wish or can model. And if you like this video tour, you can buy your tour guide a glass of wine. Her PayPal and Venmo links are in the description. So, let's get started.
So I'm standing right at the corner of 42nd Street and 6th Avenue, which means I am just 1 block away from Times Square. Straight up over my head, you can actually see up on top of a building the brightly colored Times Square ball that we use for the New Year's Eve ball drop every single year. The ball drops down for the last minute of the year, and that's how New Yorkers ring in the new year, with people watching on TV all over the world. We're actually going to have a separate virtual tour just of the Times Square area, so you will hear a lot more about that once we're over there. Also, right behind me, just across the street, is the Bank of America Tower. So this building, this skyscraper, is 57 stories. And 57 stories is tall. It is by no means the tallest building in New York City. Actually, it's only 4th tallest at this point. But it does have the distinction of being the first skyscraper to have an LEED Platinum certification. Basically what that means is that building has amazing eco-friendly green credentials. They have systems that reuse their rainwater and their gray water. They have special thermal glass that help prevent energy loss. And this is my favorite part. They filter the air that comes into the building, which is very common. A lot of people do that. But they also filter the air that comes out of the building. They act as an air freshener for all of Midtown Manhattan. They leave it cleaner than they found it. So from here, we're going to be heading into Bryant Park. So Bryant Park is actually a park that changes throughout the year. This is just a 9-acre public park in Midtown Manhattan, but there is always something going on. So at this time of year, in the winter, we have the Winter Village, which is what I'm walking through right now. These are just little pop-ups that have local artists and shops and restaurants that set up, and they'll be here until March. When everything in Bryant Park will change over again. But for now, this is a fantastic place to go shopping. Also a really great place to find something to eat. So we are walking up here towards the Bryant Park ice rink, but over here, unfortunately not running at the moment because of the winter. This is the Josephine Shaw Lowell Memorial Fountain. She was a social worker. This was the first major public monument in New York City to be dedicated to a woman. So up here, of course, this is temporary as well. This is one of our many ice skating rinks in New York City. One of them, of course, is Rockefeller Center, probably the most famous, and we'll see that later on. But Bryant Park Ice Rink holds the distinction of being the only free ice skating rink in New York City. You do have to rent ice skates if you don't have your own, but admission is free. Another great thing about Bryant Park is that you have a pretty nice view of the most iconic building in New York City, the Empire State Building. Though it is not the tallest anymore, it was for just about 40 years, and it is probably still one of the most loved landmarks in New York City. While it is in Midtown Manhattan, it's a little south of here. So actually that section of Midtown will be done as a completely separate tour, so keep your eyes out for that. When it is not time for the Winter Village and the ice skating rink, there is still always something to be doing in Bryant Park. There are ping pong tables, there's chess, there's backgammon. One of my favorite parts of Bryant Park is the Bryant Park Reading Room. During the summer, there is also a lot of programming that goes on. There are free movies every Monday night. There are yoga classes. Some years there are fencing lessons. One year there was origami. One year there was juggling. There are concerts. It is honestly one of the best places to go in Midtown Manhattan if you're not sure what to do, because at any time of year there will be something going on. So we're right here at the corner of Bryant Park, just behind the New York Public Library. This little unassuming stone building is actually home to what people consider the very best public restroom in the entire city. On the inside, there's classical music, there are attendants, there are fresh cut floral arrangements. It actually really does look like the restrooms you would find in a high-end luxury hotel. Right here, for free, open to anybody in Bryant Park. Actually, it is usually cited as one of the very nicest public restrooms in the entire United States. Right on the site of the old Croton Distribution Reservoir is the main branch of the New York Public Library. By the turn of the 20th century, New York City still did not have a public library. A lot of pieces came together right at the turn of the century in order to make that happen. A former governor of New York left his entire fortune to the city for the creation of a library. Andrew Carnegie stepped in and donated millions of dollars to build branch libraries all throughout the city. And two private libraries, the Astor Library and the Lenox Library, donated their collections, and they formed the foundation of the collection here at the main branch. This building started construction in 1902. It was officially open to the public in 1911. 1 year before opening, they started building miles of shelving inside, and they spent almost a year moving almost 1 million books in for the opening day. This library, as well as being a wonderful library collection, is architecturally stunning. It's a Beaux-Arts masterpiece of a building, all done in white marble. If you do come and visit the library, one of the must-see spots inside is the Rose main reading room. Very beautiful, very well known. Actually, because of its fame and its beauty, this has been used as a site for a lot of films, including the Ghostbusters, Sex and the City, and The Wiz. If you have seen the Ghostbusters, then you've actually seen part of the library's storage area. The majority of the storage for this library is underground. It runs all the way underneath Bryant Park as well. Out here in front, we have our two famous lions. This one is Patience, and that one is Fortitude. Their names were originally Astor and Lenox after the two libraries that donated their collections. They got their new names during the Great Depression from Mayor LaGuardia. He renamed them Patience and Fortitude. He said those were the qualities New Yorkers would need to have in order to weather the storm of the Great Depression. When you go in, besides seeing the Rose main reading room and just taking in the beauty of your surroundings, make sure you check out some of the treasures in the permanent collection here, including Shakespeare folio and a Gutenberg Bible. So right at the corner of 5th Avenue and 42nd Street is number 500 Fifth Avenue. It's not a building a lot of people know a lot about. Most tourists coming to New York City wouldn't even bother to go by and take a picture. But it is a building that's pretty unique for two reasons. One is it's a great example of what we call setbacks. If you can see that tiered shape going up towards the top of the building, it's pretty common in New York City, especially with buildings built in the 1920s and the 1930s. And I think a lot of people assume that's just because it was popular in the Art Deco style, and it was, but it was actually necessary in New York City to do that. And the reason for it is in 1916, city planners became concerned that the buildings were getting taller and taller and taller in New York City, and they were going to block out the sun at street level. So they made a new zoning law in 1916 that said the top of your building could not be any larger than 1/4 of the size of the base. And so out of necessity, a lot of architects started designing their buildings in a shape that was tiered going up towards the top. The man who designed this building was named William Lamb. You may or may not have heard that name, but he designed a much more famous building than 500 Fifth Avenue, and that was the Empire State Building. In fact, if you look at 500 Fifth Avenue, you can see a lot of similarities between this building and the Empire State Building. So right behind me, just down 42nd Street, my favorite building in New York City, the Chrysler Building. I am not alone in having that as my favorite building, by the way. Actually, architects all over the world frequently cite this as their favorite skyscraper, and it is an absolute Art Deco masterpiece. This was built for the Chrysler Corporation, the car company. The building was finished in 1929, so hence the name, the Chrysler Building. Even though a lot of the elements and the design are very traditional Art Deco, there are a lot of thoughtful touches that the architect, William Van Alen, made to this building to make it really reflect the company that was going to be there. So the eagles that you'll see adorning the building actually look like the hood ornaments from a late 1920s Chrysler. The beautiful shiny top, the famous shiny top of the Chrysler Building, is done in stainless steel. That's to mimic the effect of chrome that you would see on a Chrysler at the time. And there's a lot of little thoughtful details like that all over the building. So this was constructed at a pretty unique time in New York's architectural history. People will refer to this as the Great Skyscraper Race. A lot of people in that time period who were building new construction were in a mad dash to become the tallest building in the world. So the Chrysler Building was no exception, and it looked like they were going to be in direct competition with one other building, and that was down on Wall Street, 40 Wall Street, being built for the Bank of Manhattan. The architect of that building was H. Craig Severance. He had actually been William Van Alen's former partner, and now they were in this rivalry with competing buildings. The buildings went up and up and up, and it looked like 40 Wall Street was going to just edge out the Chrysler Building by 2 feet, less than 1 meter. And then that shiny steel spire was added to the Chrysler Building right there, just in the nick of time, and that pushed them up over the top. They became the tallest building in the world, but only for 11 months, because then the Empire State Building was finished. So behind me is Grand Central Terminal, one of the most famous train stations in the United States. This is actually the third station to be on this spot, though. The first was Grand Central Depot in the 1870s, followed by Grand Central Station, and then by Grand Central Terminal, which opened up in February of 1913. So actually the eagles on the corner of Grand Central Terminal today were taken from Grand Central Station, its predecessor, and repurposed for this building here. So the outside of the building is very, very beautiful. It's done in the Beaux-Arts style. Again, very popular, same style as the New York Public Library, just a couple of blocks away from here. A couple of famous features on the outside of the building are the sculpture grouping up there at the top. That is Minerva, Mercury, and Hercules. So that's wisdom, speed, and strength, according to mythology. Those were considered the essential components for a well-functioning train station. Right below it is a beautiful clock. That clock is the largest piece of Tiffany glass in the entire world. It is also the only clock in or on Grand Central that is set to the correct time. All of the clocks inside the station are just a little bit fast so that everybody makes their train on time. Right out there in front, the smaller gray statue that you can see just in the middle of that arched window, that's Cornelius Vanderbilt. Cornelius Vanderbilt was a New Yorker, originally born on Staten Island, and born into a family of pretty modest means, but he ended up making an absolute fortune. He was a self-made man, made a fortune in shipping, and eventually turned his attention to the railroads, bought controlling interest in most of the major railroads coming into New York City. He's the person that built Grand Central Depot, the first station that was here. So really, none of this would be here if not for Cornelius Vanderbilt.
So if you're enjoying the tour so far, why don't you go ahead and click that like button, help others discover this video. And if you would like to watch more walking tour videos like this one, then also consider subscribing to our channel. In addition to New York, we offer tours in Washington, New Orleans, Boston, San Francisco, London, Berlin, and many more cities. And if you have any place that you'd like to see us offer a video tour of, then leave your suggestions in the comment section below. Now back to the tour.
So we're inside Grand Central Terminal now. This first large room that you come to if you come in from the 42nd Street side is called Vanderbilt Hall. This is of course named after the Vanderbilt family who built Grand Central Terminal. Vanderbilt Hall at one point was used as the main waiting room area for people waiting to catch a train out of this station. We're coming in here to by far the most famous space in Grand Central Terminal, and that's called the Main Concourse. The Main Concourse is one of the largest interior spaces in the entire city, and it is also known for being absolutely beautiful. It's probably also very recognizable to you. It's been used in a lot of films and a lot of TV shows. On either end of the Main Concourse, you have these very dramatic, tall windows. These are 60 feet tall, or about 20 meters tall. The staircases at either end of the Main Concourse were modeled after the staircases in the Paris Opera House. But the windows and the staircases are nice. The two most famous features inside the Main Concourse are the information booth right over here with its famous four-sided clock and the ceiling, which we'll talk about in just a minute. A lot of people cross through Grand Central every single day. It's one of the busiest spots in the entire city. On any given day, about 750,000 people will cross this floor. That's about the size of the population of San Francisco. With all of those people, the information booth is kept very, very busy. They get an average of 1,000 questions per hour during peak time. The clock on top of the information booth, the four-sided clock, was cast in Waterbury, Connecticut. It's made primarily of brass, but the clock faces are rumored to be made of very large opals. And if that is true, that would place the value of the clock at millions and millions of dollars. That clock, like all of the other interior clocks in Grand Central, is set just a little bit fast. But setting the clocks just a little bit fast makes sure everybody catches their train. We actually have one of the best on-time rates for any large station in the world. The ceiling of Grand Central is absolutely spectacular. It depicts the constellations of the zodiac using 2,500 stars. You'll see that some of the stars are lit with lights and some of them are just painted on. That's done to reflect which stars are actually closer to Earth and therefore appear brighter to us in the night sky. If you are a very avid astronomer, you might also notice that the ceiling is backwards. But this was defended early on after a particularly astute commuter pointed it out. The artist said it was meant to be done that way. It was supposed to be from the perspective of God looking down. Some people believe that, some people believe that that was just a convenient cover, but whichever way you like it, it is still very, very beautiful. Grand Central went through a little bit of a rough patch in the mid to late 20th century. It was actually threatened with demolition at one point, but it is now a landmark building. Actually, one of the people that fought the hardest for its preservation was Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. In the 1990s, this place got a restoration that cost well over $400 million, and one of the first orders of business was to get up there and clean off that ceiling, because what you see today was not visible at all in the early 1990s. This was completely obscured and covered primarily with tar from people smoking cigarettes inside. They cleaned the entire ceiling. They actually left just one tiny little patch, that gray color, as a reminder for us to take really good care of it this time around, and just so they could see the contrast between what was there and what's here today. So we're on Park Avenue, originally called 4th Avenue. An area where Park Avenue ran to the south of here was covered in park space. hence the renaming of it from 4th Avenue. So this really changed in character when Grand Central Terminal was built. The big difference between Grand Central Station and Grand Central Terminal is that Grand Central Terminal put the train lines underground and ran on electricity. Previously, they ran above ground and they came in through here. So there wasn't much in the ways of Park Avenue to the north of Grand Central. But Grand Central Terminal opening in 1913 changed all of that. All of a sudden, you had all of this space, and Park Avenue, as you see it today, began to be built up. The building back there that kind of looms up above Park Avenue is called the Helmsley Building. It was actually originally designed by the firm of Warren and Wetmore, same architects that designed Grand Central. It was actually one of several buildings that they constructed in this area as a part of what was called Terminal City. And that was actually the headquarters of the New York Central Railroad when it was first built. It was bought by the real estate company Helmsley Spear. The most notorious member of the Helmsley company and the Helmsley family was Leona Helmsley. You've possibly heard of her. Her nickname was the Queen of Mean, and she's probably best known for leaving her fortune to her dog when she passed away. So actually the Helmsley company doesn't own the Helmsley building anymore. It was sold many years ago, but they made a condition of the sale that the name of the building had to remain the Helmsley building no matter who the owner was. So Park Avenue in this part of town is actually home to a lot of large corporations, Chase Bank, Colgate-Palmolive. When you get further north up Park Avenue, up into like the 60s and 70s, then it becomes quite a bit more residential. And actually that area is known as being one of the most expensive zip codes in the United States. So now that we're a little bit further up Park Avenue, you'll start to see another building starting to rise up above the Helmsley building. And that one is called the MetLife Building. So the MetLife building was actually originally called the Pan Am building, and it was finished in 1963. It looms not only over Park Avenue, but right above Grand Central. And actually that building and the plans for that building almost meant the destruction of Grand Central in the 1960s. The plans were to demolish Grand Central Terminal, build a massive skyscraper in its place instead. Fortunately, the ongoing battles for landmark preservation status for Grand Central were won. They opted for a smaller skyscraper building that would still preserve Grand Central Terminal underneath. So this building was the headquarters of Pan American Airlines. Now it, of course, is owned by the MetLife Company. So that was the end of an era when they put MetLife up there. It is actually no longer allowed to put a company name on top of a skyscraper, but they are grandfathered in because they did it before that was passed. The style of that is something that's called brutalist style architecture. It's very, very popular in the 1960s and 70s, particularly with public buildings and government buildings. It is derived from the French word for raw, and typically those buildings do have a very imposing fortress-like appearance. So behind me is the famous Waldorf Astoria Hotel. When it opened up in 1931, it was the tallest hotel in the world. It had over 2,000 rooms, and it was known for being very, very grand and very luxurious. Actually, traditionally, this is where the President of the United States stayed during any visits to New York City. There is a very beautiful presidential suite. It is also where visiting heads of state would stay when they came to New York City, as well as the delegates to the United Nations when the UN was in General Assembly. The Waldorf Astoria is actually undergoing a restoration today. They are going to convert the building somewhat. Part of it is still going to be a hotel, but part of it is going to be converted to private condos. They actually did something very, very similar with the Plaza Hotel not all that long ago. So across the street, this looks like one massive mansion, but it was actually built as 6 individual townhouses. And these were designed by the firm of Mead, McKim & White, and they were done for Henry Villard, who was a business associate of Cornelius Vanderbilt in the railroad business. He moved into the largest of these townhouses, and other families occupied the others. This property actually ended up changing hands several times, but eventually it was bought by Harry Helmsley of Helmsley Spear, and he built the New York Palace Hotel. But the terms of preservation said that this part of the old Villard houses needed to be preserved preserved alongside the hotel. It's a great thing to have here in Midtown Manhattan because this area used to be called Millionaires Row, just over on Fifth Avenue. At the height of the Gilded Age, this is where all of those fabulous mansions were, and almost none of them stand today. So this is just a really good glimpse at what this whole part of New York would have looked like. So we are walking alongside the beautiful St. Patrick's Cathedral, the seat of the Catholic Archdiocese here in New York. So the plans for this building started in the 1850s. The Archbishop of New York, Archbishop Hughes, announced that he was going to build this St. Patrick's to replace old St. Patrick's, which was down on Mulberry Street. People thought that was an absolutely ridiculous idea. And the reason for that is, even though, yes, this is the center of all the hustle and bustle today, in the 1850s, this was considered the middle of nowhere. People thought it was ridiculous to build a massive cathedral up in this area. People actually referred to the plan as Hughes's folly, but they persisted and they started to build this beautiful neo-Gothic cathedral. The plans for this cathedral said that they were only going to take about 10 years to build it. It ended up taking about double that amount of time, but that was largely because of the outbreak of the American Civil War. Construction came pretty much to a halt during the Civil War and picked back up, so it took almost 20 years to build. The cathedral actually recently underwent a massive restoration, cost about $175 million, but restored it to this beautiful thing that you can see today. So the idea for Rockefeller Center began in the 1920s with John D. Rockefeller Jr. He was approached by the Metropolitan Opera Company about partnering on a venture that would create a large center with a new opera house. John D. Rockefeller Jr. leased this land, which was at the time owned by Columbia University, and the initial lease was 27 years. With the onset of the Great Depression, the Metropolitan Opera Company decided to back out of the deal, left John D. Rockefeller holding the lease, but he went ahead with the project, leading to Rockefeller Center. There are 4 low-rise buildings along Fifth Avenue that are a part of Rockefeller Center. You have the International Building, the British Empire Building, the Maison Francaise, and the Palazzo d'Italia. This was originally actually meant to be the German building, not the International Building. But in the 1930s, as tensions with Germany were mounting, they decided to not offer space to the Nazi government, and instead that became the International Building. But it's probably best known for having this statue of Atlas outside in its courtyard. It's an Art Deco rendering of Atlas holding the weight of the world on his shoulders. It's considered one of the most recognizable sculptures in New York City. Particularly if you are a devotee of Ayn Rand. Arguably her most famous work is Atlas Shrugged. It's a very famous rendering of Atlas. So as we go ahead, we will also pass by the British Empire Building, and we'll see the Maison Francaise as well. So this is called the British Empire Building. When this opened up, this was the home of MI5. So Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, was posted here. And in Casino Royale, James Bond's first mission was here in Rockefeller Center. So this strip over here that we're going to be walking by is called the Channel Gardens. And the reason it's called the Channel Gardens is that is the Maison Francaise, this is the British Empire Building. Much like the English Channel runs in between England and France, we have the Channel Gardens here at Rockefeller Center. So right behind me is the Rockefeller Center skating rink, as well as the famous gold statue of Prometheus. This actually depicts the myth of Prometheus bringing fire to mankind. The reason it has such a prominent spot here is it's said that the myth of Prometheus was a favorite of John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s. So the skating rink here is very, very famous. If you've seen any Christmas movie set in New York City. You've actually probably seen this skating rink before. That was not originally the plan for this area when they were designing Rockefeller Center. This was just going to be another entrance into these buildings. They didn't get used very much. And so Christmas time, 1936, was the first time that this was used as an ice skating rink. It continues to this day and is one of the most beloved holiday traditions, both for people that live here and for visitors from all over the world. So probably the most recognizable building of all of the original 14 that were built as a part of Rockefeller Center is 30 Rockefeller Plaza, or 30 Rock for short. So it's definitely the tallest of the buildings. You can definitely see the use of setbacks in this beautiful Art Deco building. It's 66 stories, 850 feet tall, or about 260 meters. So when this was first built, this was home of the RCA Radio Corporation. That's where the nickname Radio City comes from. Because of the ties to radio and then later television for this building, you have this gorgeous mural that is right over the door. And it's called Sound, Wisdom, and Light. And what it's depicting in this mural is that television and radio can actually be used to enlighten the world. Inside the building, there are some very beautiful murals as well. One is called American Progress and one is called Time. So this is today the home of NBC Studios. So some of the things that are filmed here are Saturday Night Live, Jimmy Fallon's late night show. In Rockefeller Center, much of MSNBC, NBC News, you can see right back there. 30 Rock is also home to one of the most popular observation decks in New York City, Top of the Rock. Even though this building is not as tall as the Empire State Building or One World Observatory, it does offer absolutely amazing views, and it's very, very popular with visitors. All right, so we are going to finish up here at Rockefeller Center. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have not already, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that bell so you can get notifications every time we release new videos. We have a lot more coming your way. If you are so inclined, tips for your tour guide are always appreciated. PayPal and Venmo links are going to be included in the video information. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you soon.